welcome to Season 4 of the HR as the White Swan podcast series. I'm Elliot Clark, the CEO of HRO Today. We publish HRO Today magazine, hold the HRO Today forums around the world, and manage the HRO Today Association. We're continuing our series talking about the rewards and recognition policies of your company and what they can do to help you manage culture, incentivize employees, ensure engagement, and overall accomplish your business objectives. Season 4 follows 3 successful seasons. We started off talking about the pandemic and what you could do using your rewards and recognition programs to help get the right kinds of behaviors, the right kinds of cultures and emotional foundations to help employees get through that. And over the succeeding seasons, each one is 9 podcasts corresponding to a question. And each question starts with the letters in the words White Swan. So the WH, et cetera, and so on. And what we do is we will talk this season about reward and recognition policies in a more general sense. As we're emerging from the global pandemic, let's look to the future. We're thrilled that the podcast series is sponsored by Madison Performance Group. Madison is one of the leading rewards and recognition companies in the world with some of the largest multinational clients, and they are ranked in the top 5, if not number 1, for the last 5 years on the HRO Today Baker's Dozen for rewards and recognition. So a very highly rated firm, very highly respected firm. We're joined by their Executive Vice President, Judd Weisgal, and Judd will start us off. Judd, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be back.
Well, thank you. Judd has a wealth of experience in helping companies design and implement rewards and recognition programs centering on cultural alignment, employee engagement, and creating incentive for the proper behaviors to manage culture and ensure performance. So, Judd, we're going to start off. We're on W, and welcome to Season 4. As I joked in Season 3, you and I are the only 2 characters, so I'm hoping we all survive Season 4, unlike Game of Thrones. But if someone has to go, I'm just hoping it's not me. But let's talk about rewards and recognition and the W. Let's start with the word worthwhile. Some companies have an attitude toward these programs that it's an HR program, it's a check-the-box thing, something they got to have, but they're really not invested in the outcome. But these programs are worthwhile programs for business and business outcomes. So really, let's look at the returns on investment, the budget breakdowns, and understand the interaction between rewards and recognition programs and business outcomes.
Yeah, and thanks again. It's great to be back. I think that the key here is understanding the baseline, right? So we hear data that supports that 90 plus, 95% plus of all companies have some form of reward and recognition program. And I think it's important that as you're planning to create your worthwhile reward and recognition program, that you have your numbers ready, you have your case ready, you have your facts ready. All of that is how you're going to lead to these successful outcomes that you just mentioned. But I think that with that high number of companies that have a program, what also that means is that 90% of all companies have something that's been accepted, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, and the historical experience and spend and design of their approach has shaped their whole corporate outlook on it. And I've referenced the challenges of this in our previous episodes, in our previous seasons. And I reference one thing that I term, quote unquote, backing into a budget or using what you've always spent as an appropriate number for what you're looking to now achieve, which to me doesn't work. I've seen companies, Elliot, swear that what they do does in fact please and excite their employees, yet all too often it's based on anecdotal feedback and not research and widespread analytics. I've also seen organizations that don't do much of anything because, frankly, they tried and failed, and now they believe it won't benefit them or their people. And the reasons for that may just have been either poor planning or a poor partnership choice, and that led to the lack of results. And so planning a worthwhile program, this sounds corny, but it starts with planning. And like so much of what we talk about, all of the things we discuss are going to be easy for the audience to kind of nod along to, but it's pointless if they don't take action. It's a bit like knowing that I should exercise, but then I don't do it, right? That doesn't help. And so I hope over the next 9 episodes, we can provide some inspiration, assistance, ideas, for all of the listeners to take and put into action so they can build these worthwhile programs. And it starts to me with bring a vision to your senior leaders. Let's be honest, they will ultimately decide if the program gets built and funded, and we need their support for this and many other reasons if it's going to succeed. So make a business plan, bring data, numbers, goals, ROI where possible, cultural impact goals and improvements, performance improvements. Use all of this to ask for an appropriate budget that will drive successful launch, operation, and outcome. We have research from every major source that clearly outlines the benefits of a solid reward and recognition program. Literally, a quick Google search can yield support and analytics from Willis Towers Watson, endless HR groups, Reuters, Harvard Business School, and yet none of that seems to be enough to encourage really strategic planning or cause quote-unquote belief amongst many companies. And I believe a large part of this is what I stated earlier. They've done it one way or the other. They've either failed at it or it's status quo. And that experience is more powerful, if not entirely less accurate, than all the research out there. So I encourage everyone listening to start new research, build a case, look at where the gaps are in employee experience and performance, and see how and if your reward and recognition program can close or at least narrow some of those gaps. I promise if you present a credible, well-researched case to your senior leaders versus a pitch that sounds like, hey, we need money to reward people because that's what we've always done, you'll find greater attention on their part, and you'll have an entree to presenting them with your clearly defined and well-thought-out plan that may just receive great funding. Don't rely on old tropes. We've all heard it improves engagement or it decreases turnover. That's factual, but there's a likelihood they've heard it all before too, and it just falls flat. We've heard it too often. It has little or no impact. Instead, design a really specific plan. Use your own metrics to set a baseline, set reasonable improvement goals, work to gain the needed information to support your case. You may already have great funding. You may not, right? Your existing budget may support everything you want to do now. It may not. But without this planning and application, with applying it to your own metrics and challenges, it kind of all starts to sound like, let's spend money on making people happy, which obviously is a lovely notion, but it's not one that companies can afford to do, let alone to the tune of millions and millions of dollars a year. There needs to be an all-around benefit. And I always say, try to find the places where improvement equals savings or increased profitability. Take a percentage of that as the spend on your reward and recognition plan, and create a program that, as much as it can, self-funds. My best partners all do this, every one of them. And I think as we go through these 9 episodes, it'll be great to share some of the ways that folks can, take these plans and make it a reality.
And there is so much data about the interaction between engagement and productivity with Towers Watson, Deloitte, the conference board, they've teamed up. The real issue is, do people think about, or do the HR executives and the business leaders really think about how, if you were building from a clean sheet of paper, you would tie your rewards and recognition programs into building on engagement? If they're planning that way, then it's the old thing about math, if A equals B and B equals C. If engagement equals higher productivity and recognition equals higher engagement, then recognition equals higher productivity. So it's really, I think, a question of how they plan. And do you find a lot of companies really start off with that sort of clean sheet of paper idea as they're developing these programs, or do they fall prey to, well, this is how we've always done it?
I think, unfortunately, the pressing answer is the latter of those two, right? What I said earlier about 95% of all companies having some form of reward and recognition, then they have a shared experience as an organization that has shaped their belief system on it, whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. There's not a whole lot that causes a company to wipe the slate clean and think anew. And a lot of that is because, to your point earlier, a lot of it's status quo. It's working in their minds. There's little noise around it. No news is good news. All of those sort of tropes that aren't really true, and they really damage the success and possibilities of these programs. And so while I wish I could say to you, absolutely, everybody absolutely starts with a clean slate and says, how can we fix this and what can we do better? The reality is most come to us with a single pain point, something that they were really laser focused on that now isn't working as they thought it should or would or could, and they want us to fix that. And then we, over time, earn the right to suggest other things to broaden their horizons and really make an impact for them, especially given the spend and time and energy they're putting into these programs. But I think the overall piece of advice and guidance is you should start with a blank page. You don't have to necessarily use everything that we put down on it, but it would really be the greatest version of writer's room in coming up with the best material. And I think that that's where great success lies, is in a blank slate.
Well, I want to thank you and tease a little bit on the next podcast. This really falls into the category of, when we were kids, some weird uncle, would give us advice and say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? You'd hear that over and over again, as sort of this aphorism. But it is interesting that often we don't allow ourselves the time to plan. And these programs, we said, there's tons of correlative data and research out there, and we can make some of the lists available to the listeners of the podcast as real support for your thesis that you need to look at your plan and how you're investing and what the return should be. But there's clearly a correlation with engagement. So I want to thank you, Judd. Great comments and some great advice for our listeners. And our next podcast, we're going to talk about something that's really pressing the minds of all HR people, especially in the stress-laden times that we're living in during the pandemic, which we're hoping will end in 2021. And that's talking about the impact of rewards and recognition on health and wellness. So, Judd, thanks again for taking part, and we will look forward to having you on the next podcast. I'm Elliot Clark, CEO of HRO Today, and thank you for your time and attention.
To listen to additional podcasts in the White Swan series, visit www.madisonpg.com. On their website, you can also speak to Judd Weisgal to discuss this topic or to speak to him about your rewards and recognition program.